What happens when autonomy makes your car worthless? We're not talking in theory, this is coming fast. Just like horses became pet food when cars took over, today's gas cars, ICE vehicles, are heading for the scrap heap, and the numbers staggering. Tesla's Robotaxi isn't just a threat to Uber or taxi drivers, it's a direct hit on the subprime auto market, dealerships, gas stations, insurance, and even car loans. When cost per mile drops below $1, millions of cars become obsolete overnight. Today, we break down what autonomy will kill and why Tesla's perfectly positioned to win the biggest disruption since the Model T. Cern Basher is a chartered financial analyst who's currently running his own investment advisory firm called Brilliant Advice, providing wealth management services. Welcome back again, Cern.
Hi, Herbert. Yeah, this is a situation of one disruption causing many other disruptions. It's a bit like an earthquake with multiple aftershocks.
I love this story. There's this report you're going to present to us because people think, okay, autonomy, right, is just a new feature that cars have. And some people think that every car is going to get it. Not a big deal. It's just like, a car now has, a faster engine or something like that. It's not. It's going to disrupt industries. And you're going to walk us through all the different things that's how society will change. And you did this show last year, but it's funny because we're here. Like Robotaxi is here. It's about to go, wide. But you have this slide, which is so beautiful. Robotaxi implications, first order, second order, third order. Why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I think associated with robotaxi that are plainly obvious, and then there's some others that may not be obvious to a lot of people. And so this was an attempt to kind of talk through some of those things. But certainly first order effect, certainly, it's a new business model for Tesla, right? They're going to be going from selling a car to an individual maybe once every 5 years and making, let's say, $5,000 to potentially making a vehicle, keeping it in their own fleet, and earning recurring revenue. So it's a whole new business model, right? Tesla is an auto company. They still make automobiles, but they're being used in a very different way. Then it's also very clear that it's going to undercut, actually, today I would say destroy rideshare.
There you go.
Rideshare is a very expensive way to receive transportation, right? If you're paying $2 to $3 or more per mile, I've seen some cases where it's $4 to $5 per mile. That's a very expensive way to get around. So it's an opportunity to completely destroy that, as great as rideshare is. It's also going to reduce vehicle ownership. And I think one day it will destroy vehicle ownership for the most part as well. And that's maybe more in the distant future, but that's coming. And the reason for that is because the cost of operating a robotaxi is going to be very, very cheap, right? So that will allow them to offer fares at extremely low rates. Also, you also have the hassle of, cleaning a vehicle, storing a vehicle, paying for insurance. There's all these kinds of things that are associated with vehicle ownership that most people don't really enjoy. And then it's this fundamental unlock of the economy. Because it changes the nature of transportation, more people are going to make more trips and do more things with that. And it may allow different ways of living and working. Right. I think, Herbert, you've talked about having a mobile office, right? You might do this show from
Hmm.
a robotaxi one day, right? You
Hmm.
you could do that. The other thing too, I think that's very clear is that any robotaxi capable vehicle that Tesla has made, right, whether it's AI 4 chip, hardware 3, as long as it's upgradable, that suddenly becomes more valuable because now it's gone from a depreciating machine to something that can make you money. Again, that's pretty clear. To the degree to which it appreciates in value, that remains to be seen, but I think it's very clear. Just in general, if you take something that's sitting there earning nothing and now it can earn something, that thing is more valuable. That's just obvious. And then conversely, it decreases the value of everything else that can't do that. To use a silly example, if my toaster could talk to me, that's a more
Hmm.
valuable toaster than the toasters that can't talk to me, right? So all
I
the
don't know about
toasters that
that.
can't talk to me are worth less.
I don't want my toaster to talk to me. I'll buy
Well,
that
yeah,
one.
it's a silly example, but again, it in theory becomes more useful, right? That's what I'm trying to say.
Hmm.
Something that is more useful is more valuable. Something that is now less useful and that humans have to drive, oh my gosh, that's not worth as much anymore. And then the big thing is You can move through space and time without having to give your attention. You get that time back. Some people commute many hours a day, right? And they might multitask by hopefully listening to the show. That's great. But you could also do other things if you don't have to give your attention to the road. And that would be very appealing for a lot of people. Even just taking a nap would be fantastic. Those are what I call kind of first order impacts. And those are all absolutely huge. But there's also a lot of second and third order, and maybe the order of those are mixed up, but second and third order impacts that I think are really important also. Chief among them are the companies that make those human-driven vehicles are going to experience a diseconomy of scale. As the demand for their products shrinks, they're going to see their business suffer from this, what I call diseconomy of scale. It gets more expensive to make those cars. The vehicles, well, we can skip the one about status. That's a very minor point. Auto insurance changes, right? If you're sitting in a vehicle and you're just paying for the ride, you don't have to worry about insurance on that vehicle. So it totally changes the auto insurance market. Also, autonomous vehicles should be a lot safer, should be a lot less accidents over time. The key one there is saving lives, less pollution, less medical expense, right? So that sort of potentially upends the medical industry to some degree, although perhaps in a positive way than a negative way. But to the extent that hospitals make a lot of money from treating
Hmm.
patients with car accidents, I'm not sure what percentage of hospital revenue that is, but in some areas that might be a decent percentage. Service stations, gas stations. If you have a lot less ICE vehicles on the road, gas station economics gets destroyed and very quickly. And we're going to talk about that a bit more today. Parking, we're going to talk about that today. Okay. One thing I didn't have on here, what we're going to talk about today, is subprime auto lending. That's also very interesting because there's an incredible opportunity for people to save money by not getting a subprime auto loan, which, as we'll see, are very expensive. And then the third order effects, we could do a whole new show on that in terms of how it's going to reform our cities. And this is an unknown, but yet it's clear that it's going to make massive changes, because one of the things is that we'll touch on with parking is we won't need as much parking. That frees up land to do other things with. Hopefully, we have more parks, more livable space. Autonomous vehicles also should be quieter and, of course, less polluting. So that just makes downtown areas that much more livable, or more dense. More dense areas where typically you'd have a lot of traffic and a lot of noise suddenly become quiet. We've also touched on before, Herbert, that this will impact airlines and hotels. If you can sleep in a car going from point A to point B, you're much less likely to want to fly or stop the night and sleep in a hotel. That's a little bit further down the road as robotaxis go from city to city. Right now, I think the rollout is going to be like within cities, and that will be the focus for a while. But that third order effect is coming for those industries. We talked about healthcare costs and so on. There's so many different things, and this is just a partial list. I'm sure there's so many other things that we haven't thought of yet that will be impacted by this new form of transportation. As well,
This
and the final point here is this is a platform for new products and services. And we touched on one here in terms of curated experiences. You can sit in the car, it can be essentially your tour guide. You'll be able to talk to the vehicle, it will take you around the city, show you the highlights and things you want to see, and tell you all about it that's consistent with your interests. If you want a specialized tour of Seattle and learn about the aviation industry, it can do that. Or if you want a specialized tour and learn about the tech industry in Seattle, it could do that. So you can custom design these curated experiences for yourself. We've never had that ability before. An Uber driver isn't going to do that for you. If you're
Mhm.
lucky, you get a great one and you have a great conversation. That's it, right? So we're going to see some new business models come out of this, new opportunities.
Yeah,
Yeah. So if you like, Herbert, let's talk about parking.
let's do that. I mean, like you said, this is not all complete, right? Not comprehensive, but there's so much that can be impacted. Robo trucking, of course, trains,
Mhm.
some shipping, right? Of course, how products are delivered will be much more cost effective, and so prices of a lot of products will fall. There's too many things here to think about, but it's crazy what this will unlock. Thank you for
The
even
other
putting
thing
this list
we
together.
did do a show on recently was the delivery opportunity, and
Mm,
that wasn't even mentioned here. And
mm.
that's going to change the economics of delivery as well. So let's talk about parking. So I did this post about parking, and it's interesting because you know the average vehicle might be parked like 95% of its time. So we have these expensive assets that just sit around gathering dust and becoming essentially depreciating pretty rapidly. And the other thing too that's kind of interesting is when you do drive and you have to find parking. Apparently, on average, in the U.S., people spend an estimated 17 hours a year
Yep.
looking for parking spaces. And
Yep.
apparently, in a place like New York City, that's more like 107 hours
Mm.
a year looking for parking. What a colossal waste of time,
Hmm.
right? And the other thing, too, is we know that we've overbuilt parking in the United States. We have an estimated 2 billion parking spaces, more than 2 billion parking spaces for about 250 million vehicles. It's an average of 6 or more parking spots for every single vehicle. And so that's a lot of land that's been used for most of the time nothing. There's a more efficient way. Also, parking has gotten very expensive. If you ever have to pay for hotel parking or even you go to New York City and you pay by the hour, some estimates are in some places in New York you pay up to $40 an hour to park. So it's pretty crazy. The way to solve that is to not need to park. Then
Hmm.
you can save that money. So there are some estimates out there that will be able to remove about 80% of parking spaces once we have,
Wow.
once autonomy's become widely adopted. Put that image of the robovans on the street in my post. And this is kind of a, vision for the future. Obviously, there'd be other vehicles as well, but this is kind of a neat one, right? You've got a quiet street. There are no more ICE vehicles. There's no more pollution, right? No more emissions. It's just a pleasant day in the city. There's no parking. The vehicles pull up to where you are, pick you up, and drop you off. Right? It'd be a highly efficient transportation system. The vehicles that are going fast would drive in the middle lanes, and the vehicles that are going slower would be on the outside lanes. I think something like that's coming to our cities at some point in the future. Now, the problem is that parking is a big revenue generator for a lot of cities.
Mm, true.
Big
Yeah.
time. So in New York City, it's estimated that they generate between 750 million to $1 billion a year from a combination of parking meter revenue, parking fines and violations, right? Estimated at potentially $500 million in parking fines. And I had AI create this image for me where you've got the parking attendant here writing multiple tickets for the same vehicle, generating lots of revenue. So
Mm.
cities aren't going to be happy losing this revenue because this revenue goes to fund all kinds of services. So the inclination for a big city would be to try to replace this somehow. When in reality, in my opinion, they should be trying to then make to adapt their city and make their city more desirable to live in and attract people and attract business and grow the revenues that way, rather than try to put some tax on autonomous vehicles to make up for the lost revenue of all the ICE vehicles that used to be parked. That's going to be their first inclination is to come up with some revenue source like that. But in my opinion, they'd be better off looking more holistically at this and saying, okay, how do we better our city and make it more livable and desirable for people to be in? And if you can bring more people in, more activity, more business, then that's how you get extra revenues. So this is going to be an interesting transition that's going to blow a hole, I think, in a lot of cities' budgets pretty quickly as autonomy takes off.
Very interesting. Yeah, we need to figure out exactly how much they get. You already got the ballpark numbers there, but you're right. This is interesting. This could be one of the reasons why they fight back against this or
Mhm.
tax it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some battles to be fought here, unfortunately. Long term, I think we all get to a better place, but there's going to be some interesting battles. In my opinion, how cities handle this sort of tells you something about how they view their citizens
Hmm.
and their visitors. But eventually, I think we'll get some good models, and cities will kind of some cities will show the way in terms of how this should be handled. So another area that's also interesting and that no one's really talked about yet is the subprime auto market. So we think about buying a car and we think that, on average people pay, a certain percentage for their loan. Well, the reality is there is a spectrum of costs associated for different people in terms of where they're at with their credit record and so on, right? We rank borrowers by their credit worthiness, prime and subprime and different categories within that. So I did a little analysis here, and I determined that if the cost per mile for a robotaxi gets down to $1.17, which is kind of the average cost per mile as I calculate it for a subprime borrower, then you would start eating into that well before the $1.17. But certainly at that point, that's where the average borrower, that's their cost per mile for new vehicles, and it's about 92 cents for used vehicles. Okay, so at both of those levels, Robotaxi, based on the models that I and others have done, is still very profitable. We're looking at 25 to 30 cents per mile in costs. So you could still make quite a bit of money with this. Okay.
If Robotaxi charges $1.17 a mile, still very profitable, the
Yeah,
Robotaxi company, but this will just wipe out.
yeah,
Basically, you can't borrow money to buy new vehicles anymore, and used vehicles as well.
that's right. Now there's about 1.7 trillion in auto loans in the U.S. and subprime is about 230 billion of that. So it's a pretty big market. So here are the different breakdowns. So I've got new vehicles on the two left columns, and I've got used vehicles on the two right columns. The first column on the left is the subprime new vehicle cost. So I'm breaking out depreciation, loan interest, fuel, maintenance and tires, insurance, sales taxes and fees, right? And then I'm showing you what the cost per mile is if you drive, I think it was 13,000 miles a year. Okay. So again, highly variable based on how much you drive, right? If you drive less than 13,000, then your cost per mile is a lot more. So that would cause those people to make them more likely to switch. If you drove more than 13,000 miles a year, then your cost per mile might be lower than this, although some of your other costs would go up, like fuel and tires and things like that. But you can see that for subprime borrowers, they're spending, let's say, between $14,000 and $16,000 a year on their vehicles,
Wow. Hmm.
right? So very costly. And the blue part, the red part there is the loan interest, and it's a big chunk of the cost. Now, one of the ways that subprime borrowers get around this high cost is they buy used vehicles, and the cost for a subprime borrower for a used vehicle is very similar to the cost of a prime borrower for a new vehicle,
Hmm.
even though they're buying a used one at a much lower price. Because again, their loan interest amount is very large. And also likely their insurance costs are a lot higher as well. They're a lot more risky type of person to insure. So they get hit in two ways, right? The insurance cost and the interest cost. So, let's say 90 cents to a dollar per mile for those folks, it starts to make economic sense for them to not own a vehicle. And then for a prime borrower for a used vehicle, the cost down to about 70 cents. So
So
what
these
I'm trying to
numbers that
show
you
here,
just yeah, these numbers you just showed here, I've seen different numbers. I've seen that the typical cost to own a vehicle is around $1.50, and I've also seen the dollar per mile. Here you've got 91 cents for a prime borrower for a new vehicle. This one's $1.17, so maybe that dollar is right in the middle there. You know?
I've tried to be very conservative in my numbers, Herbert. It depends on how much you think that the average cost of the purchases and that kind of thing, and how much people are spending on fuel. And there's all kinds of different things here. I've tried to be conservative. So I think these are, at the lower end of the
Yeah,
range. It's
that's
quite
what I was
likely
saying.
that the average person is spending more per mile than what this is showing.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then if Robotaxi gets you under a dollar or $1.50, if they charge $1.50, people will start thinking twice whether or not I should buy a car or just use Robotaxi all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some areas too where, you know, in big cities, it's the cost of parking. It's these aren't all the costs,
Yes.
right? We just talked about parking a minute ago, and parking is a pretty significant revenue generator for cities. Well, who's paying that? Well, it's people. So it's not just the cost of the vehicle and the cost per mile of the vehicle. It's all the other stuff. Also, the fact that your parking garage might be 5 blocks from where you work, and you don't really like to walk that distance. So there's a
Mhm.
convenience factor as well, right? So, and of course, just getting your time back. What's your time worth to you? So there's all these things that are sort of, they're economic and maybe non-economic decisions that factor into this.
Yeah, I think the big one though is people will say, I want to own my own car. Because in case like I have an immediate need to leave the house now, I don't want to wait. I'm just going to get into my car and go.
Yeah.
But if Robotaxi is so good, in fact, Uber is so good at this point, in my city, for example, I can almost always get a Uber here in 3 minutes. So at that point, I can make that decision here. But in some places, if you're in a rural area, you'll go, do I want to wait 5, 10 minutes? Do I want to risk it? I just need a car just in case, you know?
And I think that's the case for many people, and that will become less and less over time as the network expands and there's more and more vehicles that are available, even in rural areas. It's just a matter of time.
Mm.
So here is, if you look at the right side of the screen on the purple bars, just want to show you this is for new vehicles, average new loan rate by risk. So subprime, they're paying about 13%. This is, I think, 2024 numbers, fourth quarter 2024 data from Experian. Deep subprime borrower is close to 16%
Yeah,
loan interest,
that should be illegal.
right? It's getting up there with credit card rates, et cetera. So it's pretty tough. And then if we look at used vehicles on the next page, the average used loan rate is even higher. In that case, I think because it's a used vehicle, it's a cheaper vehicle. You're getting people again that they can't afford the new one. They have to go to the used one. Those people are probably more likely to, stop paying on their loan at some point. So the rates are even higher in this category, right? So 19, excuse me, 19 to almost 22% interest on their rates on their loans. So that's the opportunity here, I think, for in the subprime market and how Robotaxi could disrupt this. Again, it's always important. We typically look at what are auto borrowing rates, and we talk about an average. In reality, there's a spectrum of rates, and there's a lot of people at the more expensive end that would love an opportunity not to have to deal with the hassle of buying a car. So the other thing that we want to talk about is gas stations, and we've discussed this before, but this is just an interesting one to revisit because some people have said, okay, we're going to have this glut of used vehicles that no one wants. So to counteract my subprime argument, these cars are going to get even cheaper. And so these people will be able to afford now a cheaper car. Why Cern would they use a robotaxi if the car now is half the price and
Mm,
they can afford
mm,
to finance it? Maybe for a period of time. It also may be possible that a lot of the sellers of used cars won't want to deal with the hassle of selling a car that costs half the price. Like it may not be economic for them anymore. So that's part of it. But I think one of the biggest issues that we're going to face is it's going to be increasingly more difficult to find gasoline to put in your car.
mhm.
So the car's cheap, but if you can't put gas in it, what use is it? It's basically just a brick at that point. So there's about 145,000 gas stations or so in the United States, right? And we need that to service all the vehicles that we have. So just the chart, yeah, on the next
First of all, I
page.
love what you call this, the fumes model,
Yeah,
a fueling usage and market extension, market extension of service stations, the fumes model. Yeah, gas
yeah.
stations
I
are
had
going to
some
be
fun.
gone. Or yeah,
Had
that's
some fun
fun.
with the name of that. Yeah.
That's great.
Um, and there's a decaying old gas station there. So one of the interesting things that's already going on with gasoline is that they're being hit from two different sides. One is the rise of EVs, which in the United States has happened fairly slowly. But there's also efficiency. The automobile makers are making more efficient vehicles that need less fuel. So from a gas station perspective, the volume of fuel that they sell is not growing maybe as much as it would otherwise would. Now, the good news for them is that they make most of their money from the convenience side of the store rather than selling gasoline. The gasoline is kind of almost the lost leader to get the customers into the stores. So think about this. If you're taking a robotaxi, how likely are you to stop at a convenience store or gas station along the way to pick up a snack? Some people
Hmm.
will. Some people want their coffee and their snack and whatever. That's true. But oftentimes you're only in that store because you need gas.
Hmm.
If you're in a robotaxi, you don't need to stop for gas. So you're going to bypass the store. So I think that a lot of these convenience stores are going to see a big drop in traffic, and it's going to become uneconomical for them very quickly from that loss of traffic. So that's one thing. But then as we map out, if you go to the next slide, this information here now is a little bit old, but basically we expect the rise of EVs to follow a curve, and it could be faster, it could be faster. That's the two green lines. And then correspondingly, we would expect a decline in the ICE vehicles, which also the gray lines could be faster, faster. Okay, so that's something that's playing out as well. Just from a fundamental perspective, we will need less gasoline to be available and sold as there are less ICE cars in existence. And you can see that trend has already begun. And so over time, we'll need less gasoline, less gas stations. So what I did was build this fumes model, as you mentioned, and on the next page of my assumptions. So I've got without autonomy and I've got with autonomy, right? So without autonomy, we never have autonomy. It doesn't exist. We just have EVs replacing gas cars. With autonomy, starting in 2026. Turns out that's about what's going to happen. Vehicles without autonomy, I've got 12,500 miles driven per year. With autonomy, greater usage, right? And I've got it ramping to that level, not initially maybe that level, but ramping to that by 2031, 47,500 miles per vehicle. I've got the growth in vehicle sales per year without autonomy at 2%. With autonomy, I've got -3% because autonomous vehicles are in use. We don't actually need to grow the vehicle fleet. We will actually be shrinking it. There's other assumptions here about average miles per gallon, um, starting with 145,000 gas stations. The gallons of gas sold per station per year is like 1.2 million on average per station. And I'm starting with the US vehicle fleet of 290 million. We're consuming about 180 billion gallons of fuel per year, and total miles 3.6 trillion. So then now what I did was with these assumptions is model out what does this look like for gas stations without autonomy and with autonomy. Here is my ICE versus EV market share curve that I'm starting with, and I capped it out at 90%. I said EVs will get to 90%, and that's it. I didn't go to 100; just went up to 90. So let's look at then the what it looks like in terms of miles driven per year by ICE vehicles in the USA. This is without autonomy. If EVs just slowly become more adopted and they replace ICE vehicles, you get a decline from 3.5 trillion miles by 2050 down to something less than 500 billion miles. Big decline in the amount of miles driven by gas vehicles. Now, let's look at it with autonomy. The next page. It falls off a cliff. This with autonomous vehicles, because they're going to replace more than one, it's not a one for one transition. The decline in the miles driven by ICE vehicles could be that much quicker. Now, again, I wouldn't fixate necessarily on the dates here. We could be off by a year or two or three or whatever, but what I'm here to say is that autonomy is going to accelerate the decline of the number of ICE vehicles, the amount of miles driven, therefore the amount of gasoline consumed, and the number of gas stations that we need.
When I look at this, here we are in 2025, right? In 10 years, 2035, you don't have to wait till it gets to nothing. You just need to know that at some point of this radical decline, the world changes already.
Yeah.
The society changes, cities change, businesses collapse. And so this is the point in 10 years. And it could happen even faster than this.
That's right.
So, mhm.
And think about you're that subprime borrower that just got that used vehicle for half the price you thought you'd get it for. You're feeling great. And then you go around to your corner gas station to fill it up. There's a closed sign on the door. And you go to the next one.
Unless those gas stations convert into supercharging stations.
Maybe some of them will be. The problem with that is the gas stations are situated in convenient places for people to fill up with fuel. Chances are if you own an EV, you're going to charge it at home. You don't need a gas station around the corner from your house.
Yeah.
Your car is already full, right, in the morning. We need EV charging in different places, more at the destination than at the start of the trip. But you're right. There's some opportunity for that. But with autonomy, all that's moot. You don't even have to worry about charging. You're getting in a fully charged vehicle at all times, or enough of a charge to get to your destination. You have no reason necessarily to stop at a convenience store, or less reasons than you did before, because you're not getting fuel or getting charged. You're more likely to go to a convenience store that's itself as a destination, like like a Buc-ee's or something like that, right? Where
Yeah.
there's a real differentiation. And of course, no one likes to go to bathrooms in the average gas station. That's never a nice experience.
Mhm.
You might stop for the food, but then when you have to go to the bathroom, you're like, oh, I wish I didn't pick this one. Yeah, these businesses will have to change dramatically if they're to remain relevant. There's some in countries like Norway, some of these gas station providers have made the switch and have installed vehicle charging and have been relatively successful in doing that. But with autonomy, I'm not sure if that's enough.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, in Norway, 95% of all new vehicles is already an electric vehicle. And so
Yeah,
we have seen there a decline and crash of gas stations. But like
yeah,
you say, it's more than that. Yeah.
that's right. So on the next page is just the chart that shows the yearly number of ICE EV vehicles sold. ICE in blue, EVs in green. That's without autonomy. And take a look at this chart now on the next page with autonomy. We don't need as many EVs to be sold.
Mhm.
You get the decline in ICE, you get a growth in EVs. But again, that's not the opportunity. Making more EVs is not the opportunity for a Tesla. It's having these vehicles in service. It's big changes. And then the next page is the decline in the number of gas stations needed. I didn't bother showing the one here without autonomy, but this is what it looks like with autonomy. It basically mirrors the miles driven. 145,000 gas stations declines down to, a pretty low number pretty quick. By 2040, it's all over for gas stations.
At what point do you think that it is a real, like like I said earlier, you don't need it to go down to 20,000 from 140. At some point here, it becomes noticeable that this is going to be a real issue.
Yeah. Oh, I think
Mhm.
late 2020s, whether it's 27, 28, or 29,
Yeah,
it's very clear that there's gas
pretty
stations all around you
obvious.
closing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And or at the very least, you will know that this is going to happen. And so you maybe that's it just pushes the decision even more to buy
It
EVs.
might become a bit of a factor if people are hearing news stories about can't find gasoline anywhere near me anymore.
Yeah.
It's an uneconomical business. Also, think about too refineries. Refineries is a scale business. And if you have a refinery that now doesn't need to make as much gasoline, you have refinery shutdowns, right? So, fuel actually could get quite expensive as there's less and less demanded of it,
Interesting. Yeah.
right? Car's cheap, fuel's expensive, hard to find, inconvenient to get it, right? It's the same thing that EV owners have had to deal with in
Yeah.
reverse.
Right now.
Hard to find a charger, not fast enough, too expensive.
Mhm.
The ICE vehicle owners are going to experience that in reverse. All right. So again, this is another issue because gasoline taxes is another source of revenue, right? And this is a chart. This is a bit old now. This is over a year, maybe 2 years old, but I think it's the gist of it is good. We've got the federal gasoline taxes at the time is 18.4 cents a gallon, and then the states tack on their own charge. Pennsylvania there was I think it's 57, 58 cents a gallon. Alaska was the lowest, and then you've got diesel on the right side. So this is a pretty big moneymaker for states. A lot of this money is used, certainly the federal money is used for highway repairs, maintenance, probably at the state level as well, roads. So this will need to be replaced somehow. I think in the new big beautiful bill, I think we have an EV tax coming in potentially, and some states and so on already do this. So this is something I think for EV owners to be aware of. But again, in an autonomous world, you don't have to worry about this.
Yep.
It's just
Yep.
part of the price. Okay. And so here I show what the tax receipts would be. Um, the federal excise tax in blue, state excise tax in light blue, and then what I am supposing is a EV excise tax to make it up.
Yeah. You're
Right.
just going to replace it. Yep.
This is going to replace it.
Yeah.
This is
One and
without
done.
autonomy. And
Yep.
if you go to the next chart, here's the one with autonomy. Again, mirrors the decline in gas stations, mirrors the decline in ICE vehicles and all that. They're mirror images of each other. But this is one where EV owners, robotaxi operators should expect to pay their fair share. Yeah. So just as cars disrupted the horse,
Mhm.
we now have EVs, autonomy disrupting ICE vehicles. It's their turn to be disrupted. This is a Gemini image here of what are we going to do with all these scrap ICE
Mhm.
vehicles? Well, you could turn them into beautiful sculptures.
Mhm.
No one's going to do this. I was just having some fun with this, but we will probably come up with new and innovative ways of reusing, recycling, doing things with ICE vehicles because there's going to be a lot of it to deal with, right? Just as you mentioned in the intro, that when we had a surplus of horses, they were used to create food for pets. The whole pet food
Mm,
industry grew out of this.
mhm.
Okay? And as time went on, as the horses declined, they found other things to put in pet food. But that's the genesis of the pet food industry. And of course, it also kind of went part and parcel with the rise of pet ownership, right? So those two things kind of went together. But now we're going to have a surplus of unwanted ICE vehicles. And I ran some numbers on this, or I asked the question on the next image. Herbert had a post about, what's the scrap value of all ICE vehicles in the United States? This image below, by the way, I believe is from China.
It's
But
a
we're going
real
to have.
image. This is not an AI generated image.
That's correct. That's a real image.
God.
Yeah. So what are we going to do with all these vehicles?
Mm.
So the obvious thing would be to scrap them. So what's the value then of all the ICE vehicles if we scrap them in the United States? And so I just ran some rough numbers with Grok's help. The average vehicle weighs about 4,000 pounds. Maybe 95% of that's recoverable. So I went through, how much steel could you get, aluminum, copper, and the catalytic converter. There's platinum and palladium and other useful things, expensive things. That's maybe about $100 a vehicle. There's a bunch of plastic, 400 pounds, and you might get about $12 from that. So
Mm,
the average vehicle might be worth, 1350 or so, give or take.
mm, mm.
So if you scrap 250 million ICE vehicles, that's about $333 billion. Not a small amount of money, but it's also not a lot considering it's
Yeah.
250 million vehicles.
Too much work. And how much work does it take to do this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably equal
But,
to the
there's
1300.
you wouldn't wanna just create the pile that we saw in the previous image and just leave them. You'd wanna do something with this, and there's a lot of material that can be reused, right? It would be a shame if we just had giant heaps of ICE vehicles around. I hope that's not the case. We also may come up with other more creative uses of ICE vehicles. Like we saw with sculptures, you could also use them as artificial reefs, potentially, different things like that that you might find uses for. Of course, you couldn't do that with 250 million vehicles, but a portion of them. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll get creative with that. It would be great if we could repurpose them into robotaxis.
Mm.
Use a lot of that material. That would be ideal.
Cern, what's your thinking about when will it be irresponsible to buy a brand new ICE gas car? So I already tell my friends today that if you buy a gas car today, brand new car, you need a brand new car. What are you going to do? I'm going to buy a brand new gas car. Now in the US, I think the electric vehicle market is only 9% of all new vehicles is electric vehicle.
Mhm.
The rest are still gas cars. People haven't yet registered in their head that if I buy a gas car today, what is its value of that car? Depreciating value, but what will be its value in 5 years, 10 years? Would I be able to sell this car when I want to sell it at what price point? And I think that if you buy a car today, in 5 years, the price of that will be so low compared to if you bought it's like time for you to buy an EV now. What's your thinking about that?
Yeah, and actually, just before I address that you raise a really important question, and something that adjacent to that is the auto lending market. Um, they have assumptions about what vehicles are going to be worth over
Right.
time, particularly auto leases,
Yeah.
and they may find themselves massively underwater. So there's going to be some fallout in different parts of this whole system, and it may show up in the finance side first before it's an issue for individuals. But to your question, I wouldn't use the word irresponsible. It's just that the economics are going to shift from a system that we kind of know and understand how it works to suddenly a big shift where robotaxi capable vehicles are more valuable and everything else is less valuable. It's depreciated that much faster. And so the question is for people then, are you okay with that shift? Are you okay with having your vehicle depreciate way more than you thought it would? And I think if people knew what that could be,
Yeah. That's
the
what I'm
answer is
saying.
probably no. I'm not
Yeah.
going to make that choice because that's economically painful. I do think with the advent of autonomy, robotaxi network, that now is the forcing mechanism that's going to cause this shift. How quickly it happens, we don't know for sure, but based on my models, it I think could start happening fairly quickly as these
Yeah.
vehicles start to take root in these different cities. And again, these are local issues. Like the city of Austin's going to see this before any other city.
Mm.
Right? This is, again, a good test market on so many different levels. What do subprime borrowers do in Austin? How does this affect depreciation or the value of used ICE vehicles in Austin? What happens to Austin's parking revenue? Like all these things that we just talked about today,
Yeah.
we're going to get to see how this plays out in Austin,
I
right?
wonder if they thought this through. The
Maybe
cost,
not.
right? Right, maybe
Yeah.
not. But the parking, but like you say though, right? I think at the end of the day, it's going to be net positive to them. Yes, the city will lose parking, but boy, what a utopia of a city this will become. Maybe we are. I think you are in. You're a proponent of taxing robotaxi companies, taxing robot companies, because the margins are so high that yes, it's okay. Go ahead. You city tax the robotaxi companies, but let them there. Um,
I think there's all kinds of different solutions. A tax might be the answer, it might not be, depending on how it's done. Um, Cities need to be careful about being inviting versus trying to grab revenue, right? And if they take a little bit longer term view, they might relax their desire to grab money and focus more on saying, okay, let's let this play out. Let's let all this surplus parking get redeveloped. We're going to have more people coming and living in our city, and that we will all benefit from that. To the extent they can do that, that would be great. It would be far better than saying, okay, we just lost a whole bunch of parking revenue. Now we have to tax these EVs at some crazy amount. That may have an unintended effect of not allowing autonomous vehicles to flourish enough and seeing the benefits from that.
you think it's a crazy amount? You think it will be too onerous for the robotaxi companies to take it on?
I hope not. I hope that cities don't do something draconian like that because they're seeing a massive hole in their budget. Like New York City, if they lose $1 billion of parking revenue and fine revenue, where do they make that up?
Hmm.
So it would be a logical, thing to do and say, "Oh, why did we lose this? Oh, it's all these autonomous vehicles. Okay, let's go tax them." That would be the natural inclination, I think, for anybody in city government to want to do that. But that may be the worst possible thing they could do.
Mm.
When in reality, it's the autonomous vehicles that's allowing their city to become something better. Let that flourish, right? Let New York City become more inviting and a place for more people to live. Reuse that real estate, build, desirable places to live. They could flourish beyond their wildest dreams if they just,
Yeah.
you
But you
know,
know what happened in COVID? The cities allowed, well, there was no cars. And so cars, nobody was driving, nobody parked. They let those parking spots become extra space for the restaurants to
yeah,
allow them. What a wonderful time that was. It was like, obviously, it wasn't a wonderful time. It was like a reprieve of, it
right,
was like, oh, I can eat here now. And you want to be outdoors. And there was less cars for pollution, more seating outdoors. So they charged the restaurants for that
yeah,
parking spot that they would have had to let them expand further. That kind of, there's ways to get it back, I think.
yeah, yeah. I think so. And it remains to be seen what all those different ways are. Some cities will figure it out; they'll go down the right path, or a path that works nicely for making the city more livable and allowing kind of a flourishing of development. And other cities will make some poor choices, but we'll see, over the next few years which ones come up with some really,
Mm.
exciting ideas to deal with this.
Thank you for putting this together. I mean, again, when we did this show a year ago, it was still a dream. Now we're here, it's starting. And so it's important to revisit this. And I'm sure there are, if you're watching this, maybe you have ideas of how will the world change? But there's no doubt about it, right? Autonomy will change some of the big business models, lots of big business models, lots. And then there'll be a lot of things you haven't even thought about. So there might be things we haven't thought about. Please let us know in the comments. Um,
And
it's
if anybody
crazy.
out there is a city planner or knows a city planner,
Mhm.
please educate yourself about this.
Or reach out to us because we'd like to learn more and have more discussions about this. This is important for society.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
There are decisions being made today that may not be the best decisions in light of what's coming.
that's a good point.
right? And so, to the extent that city planners and others that have a say about these developments can just be aware of what's coming. And again, this is one of the reasons that we do this is to just spread the word. But I'm sure in your audience there are people that know city planners. Please talk to them. Please have them watch the show. Please have them reach out to us. Happy to talk to anybody. This is an opportunity. Yeah, for cities, again, for cities to become more livable. And to me that should be the goal of every single city.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they don't, then people will move. And
Mm-hmm.
in the United States, you can move anywhere in this country,
Yeah.
right? And that's been happening.
Thank you for putting this together, Cern. You always outdo yourself all the time. And you're starting to really think about these like first order, second order, third order bits, like the real complete comprehensive view of things of how it's going to impact. This is Robotaxi. You've done a bunch on bots. You've done a lot of, what happens when you have delivery. It's low cost. What happens when products are low cost. It's quite exciting. Thank you, Cern. Follow him on his X account at Cern Basher. Subscribe to him. Appreciate you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Herbert.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.